2:27 p.m. on March 30th, 1981, outside the Washington Hilton Hotel, President Ronald Reagan has just finished delivering a speech to the AFL-CIO labor union and is walking toward his waiting limousine. The 70-year-old president, only 69 days into his first term, waves to the small crowd gathered behind a rope line just 15 feet away. He has no idea that one of those smiling faces belongs to a deeply disturbed 25-year-old man who's about to pull out a .22 caliber revolver and change American history forever. In the next 1.7 seconds, 6 shots will ring out across the hotel's VIP entrance. The President of the United States will come within an inch of death. 3 other men will fall wounded, and the nation will hold its breath as doctors fight to save Reagan's life. Here is how it unfolded. By the time this video is published, over 4 decades have passed since that grey Monday afternoon in Washington, D.C., but the Reagan assassination attempt remains one of the most shocking and bizarre attacks on an American president, carried out not for political reasons, but as a twisted attempt to impress an 18-year-old actress who didn't even know the shooter existed. It's the 70th day of Ronald Reagan's presidency, and things are not going particularly well. His approval rating stands at just 51%, the lowest of any president at this point in their first term. Economic troubles plague the nation, with inflation and unemployment both running high. Reagan's conservative agenda faces strong opposition in Congress, and his administration is still finding its footing. The president's schedule for March 30th includes one major public event, a speech to the Building and Construction Trades Department of the AFL-CIO at the Washington Hilton Hotel. The Hilton, located on Connecticut Avenue in northwest Washington, is a frequent venue for presidential events due to its large ballroom and convenient location. Reagan arrives at the hotel at 2 p.m. through the VIP entrance on T Street, a side entrance used specifically for high-profile guests. The speech goes well, with Reagan delivering his characteristic blend of humour and political messaging about reducing government interference in people's lives. ABC News photographer Hank Brown is part of the press pool covering the event, expecting nothing more than routine footage of the president entering and exiting the hotel. What Brown and the other journalists don't realise is that the security arrangements outside the VIP entrance are dangerously inadequate. A rope line has been set up about 15 feet from the door where Reagan will exit, ostensibly to keep press and onlookers at a safe distance. But the area is unsecured. Anyone can position themselves behind that rope line without being screened or questioned. Standing 3 rows back in the small crowd is John Hinckley Jr, a drifter from Evergreen, Colorado, who has been stalking President Jimmy Carter and actress Jodie Foster for months. Hinckley's face shows no emotion as he watches and waits, his right hand tucked inside his jacket pocket where a loaded revolver is hidden. Take a look at what happened in the moments before the shooting. At 2:27 p.m, Reagan emerges from the VIP entrance with his entourage. Secret Service agents surround him in a loose formation as he walks the 15 feet toward his armoured limousine. Press Secretary James Brady walks slightly ahead and to Reagan's left. Secret Service agent Tim McCarthy moves near the president's right side. DC police officer Thomas Delahanty stands in the background, part of the local security contingent.
That it is precisely when totalitarian regimes begin to decay from...
He's just about to duck into the limousine when Hinckley makes his move. In one smooth motion, he pulls out his .22 caliber Rohm RG-14 revolver, a cheap German-made handgun known as a Saturday Night Special, and assumes a combat stance. A BC photographer Hank Brown has his camera aimed at the president, capturing everything through his viewfinder. At 2:27 p.m, Hinckley squeezes the trigger and unleashes 6 devastating shots in just 1.7 seconds. The first shot strikes Press Secretary James Brady in the head, just above his left eye. Brady, positioned between Reagan and Hinckley, takes the bullet that was likely aimed at the president. He collapses immediately to the pavement, blood pooling beneath his head. The second shot hits DC police officer Thomas Delahanty in the back of the neck as he turns toward the sound of gunfire. The bullet severs his spinal nerve, and Delahanty crumples to the ground, temporarily paralysed. The third shot goes high, missing everyone and striking the building across the street where it leaves a visible mark in the masonry. The fourth shot hits Secret Service agent Timothy McCarthy square in the abdomen. McCarthy, following his training, has deliberately spread his body wide to shield the president, making himself a larger target. The bullet penetrates his chest but misses vital organs. He falls to the ground but remains conscious. The fifth shot strikes the bulletproof window of the presidential limousine just as Reagan and his lead agent Jerry Parr are diving toward the open door. The sixth and final shot ricochets off the armoured side of the limousine, flattens into a disc shape and slips through the narrow gap between the car's body and the open rear door. The bullet strikes Ronald Reagan under his left armpit, penetrating his chest and lodging just 1 inch from his heart. Secret Service agent Jerry Parr, a 50-year-old veteran who heads Reagan's protection detail, reacts with lightning speed. At the first sound of gunfire, Parr seizes Reagan by the waist and physically throws him headfirst into the back of the limousine, landing on top of him as the door slams shut. "Jerry, get off," Reagan says from beneath Parr's weight. "I think you've broken one of my ribs." Parr quickly checks the president for injuries, running his hands under Reagan's coat and around his belt line, looking for blood. He finds nothing. Reagan appears uninjured, just shaken and in pain from what he believes is a broken rib caused by Parr's forceful action. Outside the limousine, chaos erupts. Secret Service agents swarm the shooter, tackling Hinckley to the ground before he can fire again. "Get the gun! Get the gun!" agents shout as they pile onto the young man, wresting the weapon from his hand. Within seconds, Hinckley is in handcuffs, showing no emotion and no resistance. The scene is one of complete pandemonium. 3 men lie wounded on the pavement, Brady motionless in a spreading pool of blood, Delahanty unable to move his legs, and McCarthy clutching his chest. An ambulance that happened to be arriving at the hotel for an unrelated call immediately becomes part of the emergency response. Hank Brown, still filming, captures the aftermath with tears streaming down his face. "I thought I have to preserve history," he later recalls. "The images of the wounded men, the frantic agents, and the tackled assassin will soon be broadcast around the world." Inside the limousine, Jerry Parr faces the most important decision of his career. He looks out the window and quickly assesses the situation. 3 men down, a bullet mark in the window, and clear evidence of an assassination attempt. The protocol would normally be to return immediately to the White House, the safest location in the world for a president. But Parr notices something troubling. Reagan is complaining of increasing pain in his chest and difficulty breathing. The president coughs, and suddenly his hand is full of bright red frothy blood. "I think I cut the inside of my mouth," Reagan says, confused. Parr looks closely and realizes the blood is too profuse, too bright, too frothy. This isn't a cut mouth. This is blood from the lungs. Reagan has been shot, and he's in serious trouble. In a split-second decision that will save Reagan's life, Parr orders the driver to divert to George Washington University Hospital instead of the White House. The nearest trauma center is only minutes away, but Parr doesn't know if Reagan even has minutes left. Take a look at what happened during that crucial drive. Reagan's condition deteriorates rapidly. His breathing becomes more labored, his face grows pale, and he starts to feel weak. The bullet that struck him has collapsed his left lung and is causing massive internal bleeding. Reagan is literally drowning in his own blood. Rawhide. We're heading to GW. Parr radios to the Secret Service Command Center, using Reagan's codename. The decision goes against all standard protocols, but Parr's instincts tell him that security concerns are meaningless if the president bleeds to death in the limousine. At George Washington University Hospital, emergency room staff have been alerted to expect casualties from a shooting at the White House. They have no idea the President of the United States is one of the victims. When the limousine screeches to a halt at the emergency entrance at 2:30 p.m, Reagan insists on walking into the hospital under his own power. "I'll walk in," Reagan tells the agents, unwilling to show weakness or cause a panic. With assistance from Parr, he manages to walk through the emergency room doors on his own 2 feet, maintaining his composure and even attempting to joke with the staff. But once inside, Reagan's knees buckle. His face turns grey and he collapses onto a gurney. A nurse rushes to take his blood pressure but can't detect it. Reagan's systolic pressure has dropped to 60. He's going into shock from massive blood loss. His body is shutting down. "Oh my God, he's going to die," the nurse thinks to herself. "I'm going to lose the President of the United States." The trauma team, led by Dr. Joseph Giordano, moves with practiced efficiency, despite the shock of realizing their patient is the president. They cut away Reagan's custom-tailored blue suit, searching desperately for the entry wound. It takes precious minutes to find the small hole under his left arm, a tiny entry wound from the flattened .22 caliber bullet that has caused catastrophic internal damage. Dr. Benjamin Aaron, the chief thoracic surgeon, is called in immediately. X-rays reveal the bullet lodged deep in Reagan's chest, just 1 inch from his heart. The lung is collapsed, blood is filling his chest cavity, and Reagan is minutes away from death. If Parr had taken him to the White House as protocol dictated, Reagan would have died in the car or shortly after arrival. First Lady Nancy Reagan is in the White House solarium when she receives word of the shooting. George Opfer, head of her Secret Service detail, tries to reassure her that the president is fine and hasn't been hurt. But Nancy knows better. "George, I'm going," she says firmly. "You better get the car because I'm going." Nancy arrives at the hospital to find controlled chaos. Secret Service agents are setting up security perimeters, staff are rushing between treatment rooms, and the media is already gathering outside. When she finally sees her husband, Reagan is being prepared for emergency surgery, but he manages to deliver a characteristic one-liner. "Honey, I forgot to duck," he tells her, referencing boxer Jack Dempsey's famous quote after losing a fight. As doctors prep Reagan for surgery, he continues making jokes despite his critical condition. Looking up at the surgical team gathered around him, Reagan asks, "I hope you're all Republicans." Dr. Giordano, a Liberal Democrat, quickly responds, "Today, Mr. President, we're all Republicans." The surgery begins at 3:24 p.m. Dr. Aaron and his team face a daunting challenge. They must locate a small, flattened bullet fragment somewhere in Reagan's chest while dealing with massive blood loss and a collapsed lung. The president has lost over half his blood volume, and transfusions are being administered continuously. At one point during the surgery, a young 31-year-old surgical intern named David Gens reaches into Reagan's chest cavity and literally cups the president's beating heart in his hand, holding it gently aside so Dr. Aaron can access the area where the bullet is lodged. For several minutes, this intern holds the life of the President of the United States in his palm. The surgery lasts nearly 3 hours. Dr. Aaron painstakingly removes the flattened bullet, repairs the damaged lung tissue, and stops the internal bleeding. Against all odds, Ronald Reagan survives an injury that easily could have killed him within minutes. While surgeons work to save Reagan, James Brady's wife Sarah is at home watching television with their 2-year-old son Scott. Initial reports state that the president wasn't hurt, and Sarah assumes Jim wasn't even present for the event. Then the phone rings. A friend tells her Jim has been shot. Sarah's mind refuses to process the possibility of a serious injury. She assumes he was merely grazed in the arm. A White House car arrives to take her to the hospital, and only when she arrives does she understand the gravity of her husband's condition. Jim Brady has been shot in the head with a devastating wound that should have killed him instantly. The bullet entered above his left eye, tore through his brain, and exited through the right side of his skull. He's on his way to surgery with neurosurgeon Dr. Arthur Cabrini, one of the finest brain surgeons in the country. During the surgery, radio reports begin circulating that James Brady has died. Someone rushes into the operating room to inform Dr. Cabrini of the news. Without looking up from his delicate work, Cabrini responds acidly, "Where do they think I'm operating?" On a corpse. The surgical team manages to keep the false report away from Sarah Brady, who waits in a secured room with Nancy Reagan. The two women embrace, both terrified for their husbands. "I am so scared," Nancy tells Sarah. "I am too," Sarah replies. After 5 grueling hours, Dr. Cabrini emerges from surgery with cautiously optimistic news. Brady has survived, though he's suffered severe brain damage that will leave him permanently disabled, wheelchair-bound and partially paralysed for the rest of his life. It's a miracle he's alive at all. Secret Service agent Tim McCarthy and DC police officer Tom Delahanty also undergo surgery and survive their wounds. McCarthy makes a full recovery and returns to the Secret Service. Delahanty's spinal injury forces his retirement from the police force, leaving him with chronic pain and limited mobility. Meanwhile, John Hinckley Jr. has been transported to FBI headquarters for questioning. Secret Service agent Stephen Kolo is among the first to interview the suspect, and what he finds is deeply disturbing. Hinckley shows no remorse, no emotion, no understanding of the gravity of what he's done. His only complaints are about his sore wrists from the handcuffs and his throat hurting from being tackled. He was complaining about himself after he had just shot a number of people, Kolo recalls. That was not typical. As FBI agents inventory Hinckley's possessions, they find several items that make no sense. A wallet containing a photograph of an attractive young woman who appears to be a model or actress, and a piece of paper with a Connecticut telephone number. None of the agents recognize the woman in the photo. When questioning begins, Hinckley is uncooperative with FBI interrogators, offering short, emotionless answers. Agent Colo, watching from the side, decides to take a different approach. He asks Hinckley about the phone number, claiming to already know its significance. Suddenly, Hinckley becomes animated for the first time. He starts twitching and shifting in his seat. "Well, if you know about that, you know about everything," he says nervously. Colo has no idea what Hinckley is talking about, but he presses forward. "I know, but I have to hear it in your words." Hinckley leans forward. "That phone number goes to Yale University." It goes to Jodie Foster's room. The pieces suddenly click into place. The photo in the wallet is the teenage actress Jodie Foster. Hinckley has been obsessed with her since seeing her in the 1976 film Taxi Driver, where she played a 12-year-old prostitute. He's been stalking her for months, leaving notes at her Yale dorm room, making phone calls that she hangs up on, constructing an elaborate fantasy relationship that exists only in his mind. Take a look at what happened in the months leading up to the assassination attempt. John Hinckley was born into an affluent family in Dallas, Texas. His father was a successful oil executive, and Hinckley had a seemingly normal childhood, playing sports, doing well in school, showing no obvious signs of the mental illness that would later consume him. But as Hinckley grew older, something changed. He became withdrawn, isolated, spending long hours alone in his room, writing gloomy poetry and dreaming of becoming a songwriter. He attended Texas Tech University off and on but never graduated, drifting aimlessly without direction or purpose. In the mid-1970s, Hinckley moved to Los Angeles with dreams of selling his music. Instead, he spent months alone in a small apartment, going nowhere and seeing no one. He watched one movie obsessively, Taxi Driver, Martin Scorsese's dark masterpiece about a disturbed Vietnam veteran who plans to assassinate a presidential candidate. Hinckley saw Taxi Driver 15 times. He began identifying with the main character, Travis Bickle, played by Robert De Niro. He started dressing in army fatigues like Bickle. He drank peach brandy like Bickle. He became obsessed with guns and assassination just like Bickle. Most significantly, he became fixated on Jodie Foster, who played the child prostitute Iris in the film. In Hinckley's deteriorating mental state, he believed Foster was sending him personal messages through her performance. He believed they had a relationship, that she was waiting for him, that she loved him. When Hinckley learned that Foster was attending Yale University, he began stalking her in person. He travelled to New Haven, Connecticut, slipping notes under her door, calling her dorm room repeatedly. Foster, understandably disturbed by this stranger's attention, tried to discourage him politely but firmly. In one recorded phone call, Foster tells Hinckley, "You understand why I can't carry on these conversations with people I don't know." Hinckley's delusion only deepened. He convinced himself that if he could do something dramatic enough, something historic, Foster would finally recognise his love and devotion. He began following presidential candidates, first stalking President Jimmy Carter during the 1980 campaign. In October 1980, Hinckley came within arm's reach of Carter at an event in Dayton, Ohio. 1 week later in Nashville, Tennessee, airport security found 3 guns in Hinckley's luggage. He was arrested, fingerprinted, fined $62.50 and released. The information was never sent to the Secret Service. If it had been, the events of March 30th, 1981 might never have occurred. After the Carter incident, Hinckley returned to Dallas and purchased 2 more revolvers at Rocky's pawn shop for $98, including the Room RG-14 he would use to shoot Reagan. He bought them legally, no questions asked, and began practicing at shooting ranges around Dallas. On December 8th, 1980, Hinckley's fragile mental state fractured further when he learned that John Lennon had been murdered in New York City by another obsessed fan. Hinckley idolized Lennon and was devastated by his death. That New Year's Eve, he locked himself in his room at his parents' house, drank peach brandy and wrote in his diary, "John Lennon is dead. The world is over. Forget it." I still think about Jodie all the time. Anything I might do in 1981 would be solely for Jodie Foster's sake. By early 1981, Hinckley's parents had grown concerned about their son's aimless drifting. They sent him to psychiatrist Dr. John Hopper, who diagnosed Hinckley as simply immature and in need of growing up. In one of their first sessions, Hinckley told Dr. Hopper about his obsessions with guns and Jodie Foster. Inexplicably, Dr. Hopper never asked about those topics again in subsequent sessions. Following Dr. Hopper's advice, Hinckley's parents gave their son an ultimatum: get a job and support himself, or they would cut off his funding at the end of March. For Hinckley, this deadline felt like a death sentence. He decided he had to do something dramatic before the end of March. On Valentine's Day 1981, Hinckley was in New Haven leaving more notes for Foster. On one postcard he wrote, "One day you and I will occupy the White House. Please do your best to remain a virgin." His plan was to either shoot Foster and himself in a murder-suicide or kill himself at the Dakota Building in New York where Lennon had been murdered. But Hinckley couldn't go through with either plan. Instead, he drifted back to his parents' home in Colorado, where the tension with his father grew worse. 6 days before the shooting, Hinckley made a final decision. He would go to Yale and kill Jodie Foster, then himself. On March 25, 1981, Hinckley flew to Los Angeles and then took a bus to Washington, D.C., planning to travel from there to New Haven. But on the morning of March 30th, while eating breakfast and reading the newspaper, Hinckley saw President Reagan's schedule listed on page A4 of the Washington Star. The president would be speaking at the Washington Hilton at 2 p.m. Almost on impulse, Hinckley decided to see how close he could get to the president. Before leaving his hotel room at the Park Central, he sat down and wrote a final letter to Jodie Foster, a letter that would later become crucial evidence in his trial. "Dear Jodie," he wrote, "there is a definite possibility that I will be killed in my attempt to get Reagan. This letter is being written an hour before I leave for the Hilton Hotel. Jodie, I'm asking you to please look into your heart and at least give me the chance, with this historical deed, to gain your respect and love. I love you forever, John Hinckley." The letter makes clear that Hinckley's attack had nothing to do with politics, ideology, or policy disagreements with Reagan. It was entirely about impressing an 18-year-old actress who wanted nothing to do with him. The assassination attempt on the President of the United States was, in Hinckley's twisted mind, an elaborate love letter. After the shooting, FBI agents search Hinckley's hotel room and find the letter along with Reagan's schedule cut from the newspaper. The bizarre motive, attempting murder to impress a celebrity, stuns investigators and the public alike. How could someone try to kill the president for such an absurd reason? By the evening of March 30th, President Reagan is recovering from surgery in stable but serious condition. He's lost more than half his blood and come within an inch of death. But his legendary optimism remains intact. When his children arrive from the East Coast, he tries to comfort them. When he sees Tim McCarthy, the Secret Service agent who took a bullet for him, Reagan jokes, "So it's Reagan, McCarthy, Brady and Delahanty." What does this guy have against the Irish? Reagan's handling of the assassination attempt, his humour, his courage, his gracious concern for others, transforms his presidency almost overnight. His approval ratings soar from 51% to 73%. The failed assassination attempt, paradoxically, makes Reagan's presidency a success by rallying the nation behind him. The legal proceedings against John Hinckley begin in May 1982. His defense team pleads not guilty by reason of insanity, arguing that Hinckley suffered from schizophrenia and was unable to distinguish right from wrong. The prosecution counters that Hinckley is a narcissist who carefully planned the attack and knew exactly what he was doing. The trial features dueling expert witnesses, psychiatrists for both sides offering completely different diagnoses. Dr. William Carpenter, testifying for the defense, spent 44 hours evaluating Hinckley and concluded he suffered from a schizophrenic process disorder, with delusions and loss of contact with reality. The prosecution's psychiatrists argue that Hinckley has a narcissistic personality disorder, but was fully aware of his actions. They point to his careful planning, following Reagan's schedule, positioning himself for the shot, practicing at firing ranges, writing the letter to Foster. This shows premeditation, not insanity. The case comes down to competing interpretations of the same evidence. Under federal law at the time, once a defendant raises an insanity defense, the prosecution must disprove insanity beyond a reasonable doubt, a very difficult burden to meet. On June 21, 1982, after 3 days of deliberation, the jury delivers a verdict that stuns the nation. Not guilty by reason of insanity on all 13 counts, Hinckley will not go to prison, but will instead be committed indefinitely to St. Elizabeth's Hospital, a psychiatric facility in Washington, D.C. The verdict triggers public outrage and calls for reform of the insanity defense. Many Americans feel that Hinckley got away with attempting to murder the president. Congress responds by passing the Insanity Defense Reform Act of 1984, which shifts the burden of proof to the defense and narrows the definition of insanity. President Reagan himself is characteristically magnanimous about the verdict. When Agent Colo, who had interviewed Hinckley, joins Reagan's Secret Service detail years later, he has a chance to discuss Hinckley with the former president. His desire was that John Hinckley got the necessary help that he needed, Colo recalls, and then he said, "But I have to tell you something. It hurt like hell." Reagan's ability to put the assassination attempt behind him was remarkable, but Nancy Reagan never fully recovered from the trauma. For the rest of her husband's presidency, she lived in constant fear of another attack. She consulted astrologers about safe days for presidential appearances and pushed for tighter security measures. James Brady's recovery was long and painful. The bullet that struck him caused permanent brain damage, leaving him partially paralysed and wheelchair-bound for the rest of his life. But Brady retained his cognitive abilities and his famous sense of humour. When asked if he held ill will toward Hinckley, Brady said no, but added that he hoped Hinckley wouldn't win the Irish sweepstakes. Sarah Brady became a passionate advocate for gun control legislation. She pointed out that if there had been any meaningful background check or waiting period, Hinckley likely would not have carried out the attack. When his father asked him after the shooting what might have stopped him, Hinckley replied, "Maybe if I had to wait a while to buy a gun, had to fill out forms or get a permit or sign in with the police or anything complicated, I probably wouldn't have done it." The Brady's advocacy led to the passage of the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act in 1993, requiring federal background checks on firearm purchases. The legislation came too late to prevent the Reagan shooting, but has since prevented millions of prohibited individuals from purchasing firearms. John Hinckley remained at St. Elizabeth's Hospital for decades, receiving psychiatric treatment and medication. In 2003, a federal judge ruled that he was no longer a danger and could make supervised visits to his mother's home in Virginia. The Secret Service continues monitoring Hinckley's movements, tracking his whereabouts and activities. In 2016, after 35 years of confinement, Hinckley was released from St. Elizabeth's to live full-time with his mother, subject to numerous restrictions. He remains under Secret Service surveillance to this day. Dr. Carpenter, who evaluated him for the trial, believes Hinckley's mental illness was genuine but expresses concern. "I never had any sense that there was any deep remorse. The mapping of the assassination attempt on Ronald Reagan reveals a bizarre intersection of mental illness, celebrity obsession, and inadequate security that came within an inch of killing the president." The split-second decisions made by Secret Service agent Jerry Parr, throwing Reagan into the limousine and diverting to the hospital instead of the White House, saved the president's life. The image of Reagan waving to the crowd, joking with doctors, and maintaining his optimism even while gravely wounded transformed his presidency and cemented his place in American political history. The failed assassination made Reagan a sympathetic figure and helped him build the popular support needed to enact his conservative agenda. The incident also exposed dangerous gaps in presidential security and led to significant reforms in how presidents are protected at public events. The unsecured rope line at the Hilton, the failure to share information about Hinckley's earlier arrest with guns, and the ease with which he purchased firearms all contributed to a preventable tragedy. Whether John Hinckley is truly rehabilitated or remains dangerous continues to be debated by mental health professionals, law enforcement, and the public. What remains undisputed is that his attack on President Reagan, motivated not by political ideology but by a delusional obsession with a celebrity, represents one of the most bizarre assassination attempts in American history. The legacy of March 30th, 1981 lives on in the Brady Law, in reformed insanity defense standards, in enhanced Secret Service protocols, and in the collective memory of a nation that came perilously close to losing another president to an assassin's bullet. Ronald Reagan survived and thrived, but the three men who were shot protecting him, James Brady, Tim McCarthy, and Tom Delahanty, paid a heavy price for Hinckley's madness.